All right, we can go ahead and get started. Welcome again, everyone, to the YWCA's of Texas briefing. Today, the YWCA's have come together to outline our policy priorities for the 2021 Texas legislative session. My name is Coda Rayo Garza, and I'm the Director of Racial Justice and Gender Equity for YWCA San Antonio. In the chat, we will be dropping our PDF of our legislative priorities. We also ask that you drop your questions in the chat. Please add them to the chat. We'll try and answer them throughout or at the end. We have also reserved a question and answer portion for today's briefing. I'd like to introduce you all to our first speaker, Dr. Victoria De Francesco Soto. Dr. Soto is an Assistant Dean for Civic Engagement and a lecturer at the LBJ School of Public Affairs at the University of Texas in Austin. She's the author of a recent report highlighting the economic impact of the pandemic on women of color. With that, I'll turn it over to Dr. De Francesco Soto.
Thanks so much, Coda, and welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us. Greetings from Austin. Wish we could be in person, but hopefully soon. So I want to talk a little bit about this report, but also contextualize it, right? So the economic crisis that was spurred by the COVID-19 pandemic has hurt everyone, right? Everybody has been affected by this crisis in one shape or form. However, we know that women across the country have been disproportionately impacted, hence the name, the now popular name of she-cession. Typically, we think of recessions as affecting men, which has traditionally been the case, but this time we see it affecting women. Women lost the most jobs as a result of the recession, and regrettably, they're continuing to lose jobs. The latest jobs reports from earlier this month showed as much. While we're seeing a little bit of a recovery, women are still hurting. So in looking at this landscape of women having this disproportionate impact from the COVID recession, I teamed up with the YWCA to get a better sense of what is going on, how this has been impacting women, and most importantly, what can we do about it, right? So what is the path to recovery? How can we provide tools for resiliency for our women and the families that these women care for? So not surprisingly, we saw that the first hit that women took was loss of jobs. So for many of us women, we're over-concentrated in the service sector. And this was the first thing to go, and it's what is lagging until we get that vaccine in people's arms. But then the other piece of this, and this is really critical, is that for those women who were lucky enough to keep their jobs, many of them had to leave the workforce. They had to quit their jobs because there wasn't childcare. How can you go to work when you have your child at home? Whether they're at home because schools have closed, as we know, a majority of our schools are remote, and our childcare centers for those of our little ones below kindergarten. We know that just here in Texas, 17,000, let that number sink in, 17,000 childcare centers closed. Think about all of the women that translates into. We know before the pandemic, in Texas, we had 2.5 million working moms. How can we provide for these women if we don't have the support resources in place? In the report, and I'll ask Coda to drop it in the chat. There's a link to the report. It's a big report, but here are the two takeaways for you. We need to do something about our childcare system nationally and in Texas. And why? Well, because without proper childcare, women can't be maximally effective in the economic space. And it's not just about women. We know, and there's oodles of studies, it's kind of boring, but if you want, read through it, that when we are supporting women through those childcare centers and we have a robust childcare system, it's a return on investment for everyone. You know, women are better able to integrate into the workforce. Families have more income. States, localities have more revenue. It is a win-win. We have less crime. I mean, name a factor, and it is supported by having a strong childcare system. The second piece of the report, which I won't go into here, but I'm happy to address in Q&A, is also thinking a little farther to short to medium term, is we need to figure out how we're going to retrain and upskill our women, because the service sector, it was hit. A lot of these jobs will come back once we get past the pandemic, but at the same time, we know that automation, AI is coming for a lot of these jobs that us women occupy. So how do we make sure that we upskill women into professions that will be around, into professions that maybe draw on technology? How do we chart out that path? So I think this is something that as policymakers, we need to think about. But in terms of the immediate term, we really need to get our act together when it comes to childcare. Because look, prior to the pandemic, our childcare system nationally and in Texas was pretty terrible. Ask any mother. Now it's in shambles. And the thing about this is that it's regrettably across the board. Women who have more resources, women who have fewer resources, the availability of childcare has always been a problem. So this is something that we need to address head on, do so quickly, because this really is the first step to charting a recovery out of COVID, and not only to helping the children and their mothers, but economic vibrancy for Texas as a state and ultimately the nation. With that, I will leave it there. I think I'm going to pass it over to Glenda.
Thank you, Dr. DeFrancesca Soto. I so appreciate your remarks. And you know, YWCA serve families all across Texas, and they have very diverse needs. But the one thing that resonates loudly across all of our agencies, as you well pointed out, is the importance of childcare. It is a core component of our education system and critical to women's economic empowerment. There are three key things we want to talk about today. For business and for families, Texas needs a robust and affordable childcare network, as you pointed out. Secondly, there's a critical but often unrecognized linkage between childcare and the public school system. And what that means is that we need an enhanced support to provide high quality programming in the early childhood sector. We'll talk more about that in just a second. And then thirdly, we must build some institutional support for a well-prepared childcare workforce that receives a livable wage compensation. So let's first talk about this robust and affordable childcare network. Business needs women in the workplace, but women cannot choose to work unless they can afford to do so. And this is much more than a policy discussion. Real lives, real stories show us that this is true for families that are struggling today. I'll give you a good example. Anna is one of our moms. She's a typical mom. She has a full-time job making $11 an hour, which isn't bad. But as a single mom of two children, one 3 and one 6, it's just not enough. After taxes, she takes home about $1,400 a month. Her childcare runs $185 a week. So 52% of her income is going to childcare. And that leaves her about $700 for rent, utilities, transportation, food, clothes, you name it. The task is impossible. And Anna is on the brink of homelessness. She needs the umbrella of strong childcare supports. So we can provide that by ensuring there is sufficient funding to the Texas Workforce Commission, and they will support our local workforce solutions offices and allow them to fund childcare services more broadly. Every child deserves quality care, and with adequate funding, we can eliminate the wait list for childcare, keep women in the workforce, and keep families like Anna's sustainable. And that's critical. Our second issue is around the critical role that early childhood and after-school care plays in our education pipeline. You know, when we rank public schools and we look for success, we connect it to quality schools and quality teachers. And we agree really quickly that children who aren't reading by 3rd grade are at risk. They're at risk because we know they're not likely to catch up and not likely to take part in the American dream. So this is why you hear so often that children must enter kindergarten ready to learn and take advantage of the quality out of school time to help them with their studies. And the reason for that language is because schools understand that these first years are so critical, and we really don't have any time to waste. As a state, we must recognize that early childhood and after-school programs are directly linked to the outcomes we expect for our public schools. And we must intentionally talk about the essential investment in this sector, especially in our most vulnerable communities. Quality early child care centers with interactive classrooms and equitable resources prepare children to learn. And these are the classrooms that nurture, protect, identify developmental delays, and get children ready for the school system. To have this level of care, we urge the legislature to support increased reimbursement rates across the board, but especially for infants and toddlers, because that way we can assure low teacher-child ratios, adequate resources, and high-frequency interactions, the critical components of being ready to learn. You know, finally, Anna, the mom that I mentioned earlier, and the 2.5 million other Texas working mothers will tell you children need caring adults trained for these critical developmental years. And early childhood should not be an entry-level minimum wage responsibility. And yet, as a state, that's exactly where we are. We need quality education and quality early childhood workforce. And to get that, we must offer caregivers and educators a living wage commensurate with the responsibility we've given them. We must ensure that they have paid opportunities to participate in professional development and ongoing education. And so we urge you to consider institutional support and funding to improve, recruit, sustain, and support the Texas child care workforce. This is a time to be bold in our commitment to children. We strongly encourage an enhanced investment in early childhood because it's a critical partner in achieving all the other long-term objectives we have for our Texas youth. Early childhood is integral to the economic engine of our communities and the financial sustainability of our families. And there are a lot of other financial barriers and economic considerations that we need to discuss. And to do that, I'm really pleased to welcome and introduce you to my colleague, Francesca Rattray from the YWCA San Antonio.
Thank you, Glenda, and thank you to all who joined us today. Childcare is not only about preparing children for school, it's about building a robust workforce in Texas. In fact, all of the policies we are discussing today affect workforce development and economic empowerment for women. As Glenda just shared, high quality childcare empowers women, including the caregivers who provide it, to work and succeed. In a bit, we'll hear about how we can eliminate racial barriers to empower women of color to succeed. And right now I'm addressing equitable employment practices and policies to empower women to thrive and become leaders in their industries. Texas has a Pay Equity Act, and enforcing it can improve economic outcomes for women, particularly women of color. For context, women continue to earn less than men, and the disparity is greater between white, non-Hispanic men and women of color. White women earn 78%, Black women a little over 50%, and Hispanic women less than 50% of what a white man earns. Last year, YWCA San Antonio was fortunate to receive a grant from United Way of Bexar County to raise awareness about the wage gap and how it affects families in San Antonio's communities. The wage disparity for Black and Hispanic women is linked to the high poverty rates in many of our communities, in which households are led by single mothers working low-wage hourly jobs. Texas's Equal Pay Act must be expanded. Here are 2 ways we can make it stronger. A pay equity for all policy would prohibit employers from seeking salary history during the hiring process. And the Fair Pay Act would require employers to provide equal pay for work of equivalent value. Pay equity includes not only equal pay for equal work, but also valuing work typically and historically performed by women with a living wage. This includes childcare, teaching, domestic work, and caregiving for our elderly. Workforce development is another part of the equation. As we heard from Dr. DeFrancesco Soto, the pandemic has wreaked havoc on women's participation in the workforce. Nationally, in December, women were 100% of all job losses. We need policies that expand workforce development training programs that create pipelines for women into higher paying or non-traditional careers in which women can earn more. These include access to college and apprenticeship programs for women in targeted demand occupations, STEM, tech, cybersecurity, in fields where women are underrepresented. All of these policies and practices must be based on a foundation of racial justice. And here to address this, I am honored to introduce my colleague, Dr. Sylvia Acosta from YWCA El Paso.
Thank you so much, Francesca. I am proud to be part of a network of YWCAs throughout the state of Texas doing important work that impacts thousands of Texans. Also, for bringing to light that women's issues are economic development and recovery issues. I am incredibly passionate about everything that has been discussed so far today. The importance of childcare and empowering women cannot be understated. And I am here to discuss something equally important. As a leader of an organization representing the collective voices of the thousands of families we serve in Texas, I would like to introduce the discussion on racial justice. According to Reuters, in 2018, the FBI reported a 21% increase in the number of victims of anti-Latino or Hispanic hate crimes. In 2019, El Paso, Texas, experienced the largest attack against people of Mexican descent in recorded history. 23 individuals were murdered at the hands of a white supremacist who espoused fears about caravans entering our country and other hateful rhetoric. In October 2019, YWCA El Paso was called to testify before the House Ways and Means Committee in a hearing where we spoke about the language of hate, its impact on communities of color, and next steps after the attack. The fact that this hearing was called speaks to the impact of hate and racism across the country. Some people may believe that this attack was a one-off, an outlier, or not indicative of the average person's lived experience, but those people would be incorrect. YWCA is not asking for anything radical. We are asking for fairness. We are asking for equality, and we are asking for the better good in all of us to prevail both individually and within our systems. Systems that allow for unequal justice or unequal treatment should not be tolerated in Texas. We must denounce racist rhetoric. We must reevaluate policies and systems that allow anyone, especially people of color, to be treated as less than in America. These include policies on immigration, voting, law enforcement, education, and health. We are here asking the support of Texas legislators on actions that ensure safer interactions and just treatment of all people. No Texan should expect less. These reforms must ensure that dignity and equality are at the center of all legislation. We must treat immigrants with fairness. We must expand access to voter registration, polling places, and increased voter turnout. We must support law enforcement with resources that support an equitable and just Texas. I will now turn it over to my colleague, Naya Diaz from YWCA Austin, to discuss the issues of racial justice and health. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Dr. Acosta. I really appreciate you giving us a robust and raw experience of how racial injustices show up in our communities. So yes, my name is Naya Diaz. I'm the Executive Director here at YWCA of Greater Austin. I'm glad to share this space with our YW Texas affiliates and Dr. Francesca De Soto, who we actually both reside here in Austin. I'd like to focus today on some public and mental health policies that can support addressing racial justice for women and their families in our Texas communities. As we move forward to heal our communities from the trauma of over 3 million people affected by COVID-19 and the lives lost today, which our president actually has stated forecasted amount of deaths that can lead up to about 500,000 lives lost. We must seek justice by first recognizing the disparities of our Black and Brown communities affected by pre-existing social determinants of health and trauma prior to COVID-19 and the compounded effects that it has today. Our data and our narratives today will tell you one thing. Our communities of color get hit the hardest when disasters, societal setbacks, and calamities are faced. History will tell you we are still feeling the effects of the physical and mental health traumas from wars, natural disasters, and violence, which is no different than when our communities are hit with food scarcity, the opioid or foodborne outbreaks, and as we are witnessing today, the biggest health pandemic we have experienced in our lifetime. By definition, a crisis affects large numbers of people. It must threaten the health over the long term, and it must require the adoption of large-scale solutions. So we understand the following as facts. Racism is a mental health issue because racism causes trauma. Neurological research today will tell you that trauma is transmitted intergenerationally, and it affects the offspring of those initially affected through complex biopsychosocial pathways. Thus, racism is a mental health crisis that wasn't born today. It is directly linked to policies and laws that affect us in our daily lives. Racism has shown itself during the COVID-19 pandemic. We are witnessing Black and Brown essential workers with the highest death rates, and by extension, Black and Brown women. Racism is linked to access to wealth. Black and Brown families substantially have less access to wealth as compared to white families. Access to resources and wealth can help get access to good healthcare. Through systemic racism, there was a massive disinvestment in communities of color, disinvesting in Black and Brown communities, eliminating access to wealth, access to good schools and good healthcare, while investing in policing and putting Black and Brown people in prison, instead of focusing in transformative and restorative methods of healing and trauma-informed support. Declaring racism as a public and mental health crisis validates the threat racism poses to society by linking it directly to social crises, like the increase of homeless communities, displacement of communities driven by bioenvironmental disparities, the school to prison pipeline, compounded by the cultural reckoning and community threats posed by health crises. We seek to dismantle the systems that perpetrate these crises and rebuild our systems of care in ways that seek to undo historic injustices and inequities. So to achieve racial equity, to achieve that is a new reality where race can no longer predict life outcomes and where outcomes for all groups are improved, governments must dismantle the system of racism. They must provide support, consistently evaluate whether government actions reinforce racism, partner with racial and ethnic minorities to craft solutions, and incorporate a healing process to address the trauma of experiencing racism. Here at the YWCA, a part of our mission is to eliminate racism. So today we ask Texas leadership to address systemic injustices to our public health sector, standing alongside over 160 cities, municipalities, and institutions across the country, of which 4 are our own Texas cities, declaring racism as a public and mental health crisis. We ask that you prioritize the policies we have laid out in our agenda to begin to chip away at the racial injustices that continue to hurt our Texas communities. So today we had Dr. Francesco Soto and our YWCA Texas sites presented us with some insights and policies needed in our Texas communities. And I'm going to now send it over to final remarks. Please welcome back my colleague, Coda Rayo Garza, Director of Racial Justice and Gender Equity for YWCA in San Antonio.
Thank you so much, Naima, and thank you all. On behalf of Terry Broussard-Davis, the CEO of YWCA in Houston, who's not able to join us today, it's my honor to deliver the closing remarks. Today marks an important day for the YWCAs of Texas. We've come together in support of this policy agenda because our mission drives the work that we do, and the work that each of us does in our community. And the policies that we've talked about today with you are so central in realizing our mission. They are the policies that will benefit some of the most vulnerable among us, especially women of color. And we need your help to make them a reality. Our work will not stop until justice just is. You can count on us for the expertise we've each gained serving our communities, serving your constituents. And I hope that we can count on you to move these policies forward to support women, children, and families of Texas. And with that, we'll move over to the question and answer portion of today's briefing. Please feel free to drop some questions in the chat if you have any. It looks like we have a question here from Mahala Plisa. Relating to your childcare priority, last session, Representative Ray Lopez filed HB 4753 relating to a study of the cost of childcare in comparison to family income. The bill passed the House and died in the Senate. You've refiled an improved version of this bill to include the quality in the study. This is meant to identify childcare deserts, yes, which we, YWCA San Antonio, have identified those within our area, the wage gap and other challenges for parents. Do you have any bills or bill ideas you're looking to file? Yes, absolutely. We can definitely connect with you on that. I can hand it over to Glenda or Francesca if there's something in particular that you'd like to highlight.
Go ahead, Francesca, or I'll just say that we will contact you offline to talk about what kinds of things that you feel like you may need. I'm certain that the combination of this team from the YWCAs across Texas can provide you some additional support on those issues. Francesca, would you have anything else to add?
On the issue of childcare, the Texas Workforce Commission controls childcare subsidies. We propose and would like to encourage that funding for childcare subsidies increases, stays constant, that the wait list moves quickly so that parents can access these funds to have high quality childcare. And with regard to the wage gap, what we mentioned earlier, equal pay for work of equal value, expand Texas's Equal Pay Act that we already have enacted, and encourage at the local level for employers and municipalities to enforce equal pay for equal value, so that hourly workers, like our childcare workers, can earn a living wage.
I'd also like to state that we are partnering with statewide organizations like Early Matters, as well as Children at Risk, that are introducing legislation and working with various legislators throughout the state of Texas to promote equitable child care legislation. Please thank Representative Lopez. We know that it is a heavy lift, especially during this budget year, but we also know that children must be a priority and childcare must be a priority if we are to recover economically as a state. So thank you very much. And I do have a list of those legislative priorities, and we will be sharing those with you.
There's another question in the chat from Simon Salas. He's asking, who are the state legislators that are advancing our legislative priorities? Simon, this is historic. Today is a historic day because today we are coming together united for the first time to share with you all, with the legislature, our priorities. We are certainly looking for partners, certainly looking for bills to support. Again, you can count on our expertise. Happy to provide testimony at committees, happy to share data that we have. We have quite a robust research and data component that we're happy to share with you all. But that's where we are right now. We've now shared with the community, with all of you, what our priorities are. And so the next step for us is the advocacy piece, to continue to do that. Partner with your offices, partner with other community organizations to address our priorities. It looks like there is another question from Teresa Myers. I would like to make a special ask. All of the issues you noted are only emphasized to a single mother of special needs child. My ask is that this can be highlighted and mentioned in your ask, particularly with the statistics showing an increase in autism diagnosis in our children. I could hand this over to maybe Naya or Glenda, any of our CEOs that would want to take this question here, or recommendation rather, that have a comment to share.
Absolutely. I think this is a very key point, is that what we see in our own centers across Texas is the increasing number of children with special needs that need to be addressed, and that need to be addressed through the funding sources, because they do often require special ratios, they require special activities, special resources, and childcare centers need that additional support. So for sure, we can add that into our legislative priorities.
All right, it says that someone mentioned that, from Sharon Murphy, someone mentioned that 100% of jobs lost during COVID were women, correct? Could I get a link to the data? This was Francesca. I'll hand it over to her. And I think she was pointing to a point in time data. So I'll let her speak to that.
Yes, that's a national statistic that 100%, in December only, 100% of the job losses were women. I can find a link in a moment. It's been quoted in multiple locations. So I will find that and share that with you. And the job losses are due to, their net losses due to women leaving because their children need support, and also getting laid off. So as soon as I'm able, in a moment, to put in the chat a link to that information, I will get it for you.
Yes, and I will also add that here in San Antonio, we do have data supporting or telling us that as of October, there had been 44,441 Latinas in particular that have left the workforce. So obviously, part of the She session, part of the economic impacts of the pandemic. Are there any other questions that anyone has? Melissa, if we'll drop again the link to our agenda along with the link to the bios. Please feel free to reach out with any questions. We'll connect folks with the appropriate point of contact. But if there aren't any more questions, we want to thank each of you. We want to thank representatives from our legislative offices, representatives themselves who joined us today, community partners and funders who were a part of our briefing today. We look forward to working with all of you, and please stay tuned. You'll be hearing more from us. Take care and have a good.
Hold on, I think Dr. Acosta was going to add something. She popped up for a second, maybe not. Yes.
Yes, in response to Olivia Lewis, we are tracking HB 1026 as we are concerned that it's going to impact voting. So that is something that I would like to put on your radar.
All right. Well, thank you all so much. Have a good day.